If you thought the biggest twist had already happened, think again. Remember that heart-pounding moment when Nina, pinned in the barn loft, escaped through the roof under a hail of bullets? That was only a taste of what this story still has in store. In this next installment, we'll dig deeper into the fallout, both the lingering threats that lurk in the shadows and the unexpected allies who appear when hope seems lost. You won't want to miss how Nina's tactical brilliance and the community's gritty determination combine to push back against forces that seem unbeatable. Want to find out how they manage to safeguard their land and their future? Stick around till the very end. Before we jump into part 3, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Not only will you stay updated on how the showdown unfolds, but you'll also be the first to catch more thrilling stories that we share here. Now let's continue our journey into the heart of Lunado Springs, where everyday ranchers rise to extraordinary challenges. Nina Donovan's life had changed drastically from the moment she returned home to the desert hills of Lunado Springs. After 13 years in the Marine Corps, much of that time as an elite sniper deployed across multiple theaters, she found solace working with her brother Liam on their family's sprawling ranch. The land stretched over 5,000 acres of rugged terrain, dotted with cattle and rimmed by fence lines that had seen better days. As the sun painted the Arizona sky each morning, Nina made a habit of patrolling the property, an echo of her old life that she couldn't quite abandon. She walked with keen eyes, scanning for signs of damage, footprints, or anything out of place. In her hands, she sometimes carried the old rifle that once belonged to her grandfather, but anyone paying close attention would notice she was far more familiar with modern weaponry. The ranch hands joked that she was just a stickler for her details, but her unwavering vigilance hinted at a different level of expertise. Liam had welcomed her home without questions or conditions. After their parents passed, the weight of running the ranch alone had become near impossible. Money was always tight. Feed, veterinary bills, ranch hand wages, tractor repairs, none of it got cheaper as time went on. Nina's presence, along with her military pension, was a godsend. She worked tirelessly, mending fences, hauling supplies, and coordinating with local buyers for their cattle. More importantly, she infused a sense of calm efficiency into the daily grind. That calm, however, masked something deeper. Although she rarely spoke of her deployments, there were nights when the desert wind carried triggers of memory that jolted her from sleep. Liam never pressed her about it. Siblings often communicate more in silence than in words, so he let her keep her secrets while she offered him the stability he desperately needed. Things might have continued peacefully, but trouble crept into Lunado Springs like a slow leak in a windmill pump. Local ranchers had begun reporting strange occurrences: fences cut in the night, footprints indicating groups moving through their properties, and even the occasional vanishing livestock. Nothing dramatic at first, just enough to sow uncertainty and keep everyone on edge. The county sheriff, Eva Mendez, made her rounds more often, checking on ranchers who whispered about the possibility of a dangerous cartel pushing into new territory. Most hoped it would blow over or that law enforcement could handle it. Nina felt otherwise. Every morning she noticed new tire marks or footprints near the edges of the Donovan property. Something about them reminded her of the methodical patterns she had once seen in classified briefings overseas. These were not hapless wanderers or desperate migrants. This was organized military-style movement. Liam tried to reassure the ranch hands that everything was fine, but Nina's instincts told her otherwise. In a region where small crimes could easily go unnoticed, the scale of these clandestine intrusions was unsettling. Still, she kept most of her concerns private. One reason was that she didn't want to stir panic among her neighbors. Another was that, if her suspicions were correct, this wasn't going to be a small skirmish. She could sense the tension in the dry desert air, the same brand of tension she had felt in conflict zones around the world. The hush before a storm. One crisp morning, just before dawn, Nina found what she had been dreading: fresh footprints near a ridge that overlooked a shallow creek bed on the eastern edge of the ranch. The footprints were too uniform, the stride too measured. Whoever had passed by wore heavy boots and moved in a formation that left tracks spaced with near-perfect regularity. Nina crouched low, running her fingers along the faint imprints in the dust, trying to gauge the group's size and direction. Based on the scatter of the prints, she guessed 4 individuals, each carrying significant weight. No stray bullet casings this time, but she had found those on previous days, hinting that whoever roamed this land wasn't just scouting. They had firepower and were unafraid to use it. Quietly, she reported her findings to Liam at breakfast. The old kitchen table in the Donovan house was piled with receipts and ranch ledgers. Liam was sipping lukewarm coffee while poring over the monthly budget, looking more tired than usual. The talk of footprints and clandestine intruders pulled him from his financial woes. Organized, he asked, eyebrows knit in concern. Nina nodded. I've seen similar patterns overseas, in areas where well-trained groups operated. They move under cover of darkness, gather intel, then melt away. She paused, letting the gravity settle. We need to be cautious. That very morning, as if on cue, Sheriff Mendez arrived in her dusty SUV, a tan vehicle that had seen countless miles of county backroads. She parked in her usual spot, stepping out and adjusting her service belt. Seeing Nina's serious expression, Mendez wasted no time. What do we have this time? Nina explained the footprints, the suspicious patterns, and her sense that this was more than petty trespassing. Mendez pursed her lips. We have multiple ranchers in the area noticing cut fences, strange vehicles at night, and the disappearance of livestock. Some blame coyotes or local rustlers, but I suspect something bigger. Word is a cartel might be rerouting operations. They lost ground on the main highways, so they're looking for new passages, and our land is prime real estate for cross-border runs. The sheriff sipped the coffee Nina handed her. Is it possible we're looking at a group feeling out vulnerabilities in ranch security? If they want to smuggle contraband, they'll want an easy route. Nina nodded in agreement. That's exactly the pattern. Identify a location, push out or intimidate local landowners, then set up shop. Mendez exhaled, the lines on her face deepening. I'm just one county sheriff. We have minimal resources, and the feds take forever to mobilize. We need proof before I can escalate this further. Liam, standing nearby, folded his arms. What kind of proof? The sheriff gave a half shrug. Evidence of a bigger conspiracy, direct confrontation, or identification of key players. Until then, I can't exactly call in an armada of Border Patrol agents. Best I can do is extra patrols and keep talking to folks around here. Though the sheriff left promising to stay alert, Nina and Liam shared a look of quiet resolve. She had seen enough to suspect that if push came to shove, they'd be on their own, at least initially. And with each passing day, the footsteps near the property crept closer to the heart of the ranch. Nina made a silent vow. No matter what, she would protect her brother and this land. She might have hung up her uniform, but there was no discharge from the instincts and skills she had spent over a decade perfecting. Tara Chang, a local veterinarian, arrived at the Donovan Ranch a few days later. She was a second-generation rancher herself, having inherited her parents' small horse breeding operation to the west. While Tara's official reason for visiting was to check on a pregnant mare, Nina suspected there was more on her mind. As Tara hopped out of her pickup truck, Nina couldn't help but notice the subtle bulge of a holstered sidearm beneath the vet's loose-fitting jacket. Tara had never carried a visible weapon in all the years they'd known each other. This was new. Nina greeted her warmly, and the pair walked together to the stable. Tara began her usual checkup on the mare, feeling for tension and listening to the horse's breathing. But her eyes darted around the stable, as though assessing the surroundings. How are things really going here, Nina? She asked, her voice low. Nina hesitated before responding. We've had signs, footprints, cut fences, disappearing cattle, same as everyone else. But I'm worried it's more than random trouble. Tara nodded grimly, pressing a stethoscope gently to the mare's flank. I had visitors a few nights ago, polite, well-dressed men in nice trucks. They stopped by my place to talk about investment opportunities. She spat out the words like they tasted bitter. Mentioned how a small rancher like me should consider selling off a chunk of land for guaranteed cash. And they dropped a hint, how dangerous it can be for a woman living alone, how helpful the right friends could be. It was exactly the kind of subtle intimidation that Nina had expected. Cartels, or those working for them, rarely jump straight to violence. They tested boundaries first, felt out vulnerabilities, and only then tightened the screws. Nina glanced at Tara's hip, hence the new sidearm. Tara sighed. I hate this. I hate feeling like I'm in a conflict zone in my own backyard. but I'm not going to let them bully me. She lowered her voice further. You were in the Marines, right? I've seen you set up cameras around your property. That's not standard ranch stuff. You've got training, Nina. Real training. We all know it. People are spooked. We've heard the rumors about cartels muscling in. Nina nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. I did a lot of overseas work. Some things are better left unsaid. But yes, I have training, and I'm not going to stand by if our community is at risk. Tara's expression hardened with determination. We need to start working together. The sheriff does what she can, but we both know her resources are stretched. Every rancher around here is vulnerable if we stay isolated. They finished with the mare, and Tara packed up her gear. Before leaving, she rested a hand on Nina's shoulder. When you are ready to organize something, some sort of neighborhood watch, or maybe more than that, count me in. I might not be a soldier, but I'm not helpless either. Nina smiled, grateful for the support. The desert sun glinted off Tara's truck as she drove away, leaving a thin trail of dust behind. Watching her go, Nina felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. If more neighbors could be convinced to stand up rather than flee or acquiesce, maybe they had a chance. A week later, the tension escalated. Liam woke Nina in the early hours, face pale. Two of their most valuable breeding bulls had been found injured, not fatally but obviously shot. Wounds that cost them thousands in veterinary bills and threatened their breeding programs. At sunrise, Nina inspected the site. The bullet holes were precise, aimed to wound rather than kill, almost like a calling card that said, "We can hurt you anytime we want." She stooped to pick up a few spent casings on the ground. The caliber and make matched some of the more specialized ammunition she'd seen used by professional operators in her Marine days. This wasn't the random pot shot of some drunk with a rifle. It was intentional, targeted. Every muscle in her body tensed as she realized the violation was more than property damage. It was psychological warfare. The message, "We're here, we're armed, give us what we want." Word spread quickly. Tara called Nina within an hour, outraged on the Donovans' behalf. Another rancher, Grant Howell, reported that his fences had been cut the previous night. He'd chased off a group of men before they could do more damage, but he recognized the same pattern. Well-organized, methodical. Sheriff Mendez arrived on the scene as usual, but there was little she could do beyond file a report. "We have no definitive leads," she said, frustrated. "No faces, no license plates, nothing concrete to tie them to an organized group. But I know this is them, whoever they are. People around here are spooked and are talking about leaving." Nina felt her anger simmer. This was exactly how cartels operated. Start small, instill fear, erode the sense of security. Then come the veiled threats and offers, and to take property off one's hands at a fair price. She had seen it in other parts of the world, though typically it was warlords or insurgent groups. The structure was the same, and fear was their main weapon. Liam wasn't immune to that fear. He looked at the wounded bulls, the blood in the dusty corral, and the mounting costs. "We can't sustain this," he murmured. "If they keep hitting us, we'll go broke from the veterinary bills alone." Then there's the ranch hands. Some are already whispering about safer jobs in town. But Nina was resolute. "We fight back, not with guns blazing or vigilante stunts, but systematically using the strengths we have. This is our land, and we know it better than any outsiders." She pulled Liam aside, lowering her voice. "I've started placing higher-grade surveillance cameras around. We'll document everything. We'll set up watchers, folks who can keep an eye on the perimeter. And I'm going to talk to Tara about getting other ranchers on board for a community network of information sharing. We protect each other." Across the yard, a few ranch hands gathered in uneasy clusters, casting wary glances at the injured bulls. They didn't sign up to be part of some showdown, but they also needed these jobs. Nina offered them reassuring words, careful not to overpromise. The truth was, nobody knew how far these intruders might go. But Nina recognized a time-tested principle. Isolation was weakness. If they wanted to survive, they had to unite. That evening, Nina convened an informal meeting in the ranch's old bunkhouse. Word had traveled quickly through phone calls, text messages, and the local gossip network that was more effective than any official channel. About a dozen people showed up, ranch owners, foremen, and a few longtime ranch hands who were deeply invested in the community's survival. Liam brewed extra coffee, and Tara arrived with maps and notes she'd collected from neighboring properties. "Here's the reality," Nina began, standing by a makeshift whiteboard. "We're all getting hit, or about to be. Fences cut, animals wounded, pressure to sell our land, mysterious visitors offering sweet deals right after something bad happens. This isn't random." She stepped aside to reveal a rough sketch of the local area, complete with roads, water sources, and property boundaries. "We suspect a cartel, or at least a well-organized group, is trying to push north through our region. They use intimidation, small acts of violence, and infiltration until we fold. Then they do whatever they want with the land, drug smuggling, human trafficking, you name it." Grant Howell, who owned a medium-sized ranch near the main highway, raised his hand. "But we're not soldiers. We can't just start shooting. We'll get ourselves killed or end up in prison." His voice shook with fear and frustration. A chorus of agreement rippled through the group. Tara cut in, her vet scrub still stained with the day's labor. "Nina's not suggesting we turn into a militia, right?" She gave Nina a pointed glance. Nina nodded. "Exactly. We fight with our heads. We set up a communications network, old school radio, group text, or an app with encryption. We can coordinate. Second, we place better lighting and cameras. Third, we track every vehicle that comes through, record plate numbers if we can. We're not trying to confront them head on yet. We're going to gather intel, just like they're doing to us. The more we know, the better we can respond." The group fell silent, the weight of the situation setting in. Finally, a ranch hand named Ismail spoke. "I grew up near the border. I've seen how these people operate. They'll keep poking until we break. We either stand together or each of us becomes a target." A collective nod followed. Liam, usually more reserved, piped up with sincerity. "We can't do this alone, but together we might stand a chance. Nina has the know-how to at least get us started. And Sheriff Mendez, while limited in resources, is on our side. We coordinate with her too whenever possible." They spent the next couple of hours hashing out details. Who would watch which part of the territory, how to pass along suspicious activity, when to call in the sheriff, and how to remain discreet enough so as not to provoke a premature assault. By the end of the meeting, no one felt truly safe, but they had a plan. It was fragile, untested, and relied on a level of trust between neighbors that had frayed over recent years. But it was all they had. As the group disbanded, Nina's mind roiled with scenarios, some from her past life on duty, others from nightmares she could never quite shake. Over the next few weeks, the community's new vigilance began to unnerve the intruders. Nina could sense it in the patterns of movement she saw on her surveillance cameras. Groups still traversed the outer edges of the ranches, but now they did so less boldly, zigzagging through old riverbeds and canyons to avoid being spotted. Meanwhile, the donkey trails and hidden gullies that ranchers had known for generations became crucial vantage points for watchers who quietly monitored the nocturnal comings and goings. Sheriff Mendez was cautiously optimistic about the community-led initiative. While she warned them not to cross any legal lines, she also recognized that her department lacked the manpower to effectively patrol such a vast rural stretch. Whenever possible, she'd send a patrol car to do a few rounds at night, but it was more symbolic than truly preventative. Still, the fact that the locals were documenting license plates and potential safe houses was invaluable. Mendez started compiling a dossier of suspicious activity that she hoped might someday lead to a broader investigation. Even with these efforts, the cartel, if that's indeed who they were, did not back down. In fact, the intimidation tactics grew darker. More livestock went missing, and bullet-riddled carcasses were found on less defended properties. Some ranchers received anonymous letters or phone calls promising them safety if they would just cooperate, or ominously hinting that accidents happen to those who resist. One rancher's dog was shot in the leg, a cruel echo of the bullet wounds inflicted on the Donovan bulls. It was all part of a well-worn playbook: terrorize the community until fear outweighs the will to fight. But the unexpected happened. Instead of folding, Lunado Springs started to unite. Tara and a few others formed a radio club that disguised itself as a group interested in ham radio as a hobby. In truth, they used shortwave radios to keep each other updated on suspicious vehicles and late-night visits. The local feed stores started offering discounts to ranchers who installed certain types of motion sensor lights, giving an air of normalcy to what was actually a strategic defense upgrade. Nina herself spent evenings teaching small groups about basic fieldcraft, how to move silently, recognize patterns of surveillance, and keep logs of suspicious activity without drawing attention to themselves. Word was that folks began to see the desert not as an oppressive wasteland, but as a protective ally if they used it right. Liam, for his part, managed to keep the ranch afloat. He cut unnecessary costs and doubled down on direct sales to local butchers. Any money saved was funneled into security upgrades, reinforced gates, better locks, and more cameras. Some ranch hands left, scared off by the tension, but others stayed, either out of loyalty or because they sensed that Nina was orchestrating something bigger. A hush fell over Lunado Springs in those days, a waiting game in which both sides, local ranchers and the unknown intruders, seemed to be testing each other's resolve. Late one night, an old barn on the far side of the Donovan Ranch became the site of a pivotal encounter. Nina had converted part of it into a secure spot for monitoring camera feeds from multiple vantage points. Sturdy walls insulated the electronics from dust, and she had wired it for off-grid power just in case. That evening, the monitors lit up with movement along the northeastern fence line, an area typically quiet. Four figures approached stealthily, using the shadows and rolling terrain to obscure themselves. Yet Nina's cameras caught glimpses, silhouettes against the moonlight, the glint of metal in a raised rifle or scope, and deliberate hand signals between them. Nina alerted Liam via shortwave. "We've got a group, 4 men armed, heading toward the main pasture. Stay put, I'm going to track them." She grabbed her gear, night vision goggles, a sidearm, and the old rifle, though she considered it more of a symbolic carry, as her real arsenal was hidden elsewhere. Slipping out of the barn, she moved across the open land like a silent wraith, applying every ounce of training gleaned from years in the military. She positioned herself behind a cluster of mesquite bushes near the fence line, close enough to hear the intruders' hushed voices. They spoke Spanish with a distinct accent, and from the occasional code words, Nina recognized the hallmark of disciplined, possibly former military personnel. One man knelt by the fence, testing it with gloved hands, while another scanned the horizon with night vision binoculars. They spoke of weak points and next phase, mentioning that the ranch would be easy to overrun once signals were jammed. Nina's pulse quickened. They were planning a more significant operation, perhaps involving specialized equipment to block phone calls, radios, or both. This was bigger than the small acts of intimidation they had employed so far. Before they could do more damage, the men retreated, melting back into the darkness. Nina tracked them to a waiting pickup truck on a dirt road, snapping mental pictures of the vehicle's shape and any identifying marks. For the first time in years, she felt that old adrenaline surge, the sense of having penetrated enemy lines and gleaned critical intel. She didn't open fire or confront them. Doing so alone would be suicide, and besides, she needed more information. She needed them to continue underestimating the rancher's preparedness. Back at the barn, Nina quickly sketched out everything she had seen and heard, cross-referencing with the license plate data the radio club had collected. A pattern emerged. These men belonged to an organized cell that was systematically probing not just her ranch, but several properties along a strategic route. They were methodical, referencing phases of an operation, and equipped with advanced gear. Nina's old instincts roared to life. This was not a ragtag bunch of criminals. It was a disciplined team. If they were ex-military or had training from specialized groups, the danger level had just shot through the roof. As rumors of a larger offensive swirled, tension within the community reached a fever pitch. Tara reported that she'd found suspicious tire tracks near a water trough on her property, along with footprints indicating a group scanning the terrain. Grant Howell discovered electronic components near his ranch entrance, possibly parts of a signal jammer or reconnaissance drone, and an elderly couple, the Garcias, woke one morning to find an ominous note pinned to their front door, warning them to sell while you can. Nina called another meeting, this time at the old community center in town, so that more people could attend without arousing suspicion. Sheriff Mendez managed to drop by in plain clothes, offering what little official support she could. The atmosphere was tense as folks spoke over one another, sharing the newest incidents. Stories piled up fast, from threatened stable boys to suspicious trucks lingering at odd hours. Finally, Nina took the floor. From what we've gathered, she began, these people have shifted from probing to planning a major push. We've documented equipment that looks like it's meant for jamming communications. Once that's in play, they'll isolate each ranch and pick us off one by one, pressuring us to sell or worse. We can't let that happen. She pulled a folded map from her jacket. We need to establish real-time communication that can't be jammed by typical equipment. Maybe we use old analog radios on frequencies they won't think to block. We also set up a system of signals, flares, lights, anything physical, so that if the electronic methods go down, we still know when someone is attacked. Eyes darted around the room, anxious and uncertain. Sheriff Mendez cleared her throat. I have to remind you to stay within the law. I can't endorse vigilante activity, but self-defense is your right. Keep records, stay coordinated. If we can collect hard evidence, I can try to bring in state or federal support. Her expression was torn, clearly wanting to help more but constrained by the realities of her office. Liam, who usually let Nina take the lead, spoke up. We can do the flares. I can rig some launchers around the ranch. We used them back when my dad set up an old wildfire warning system. Those might still be salvageable. Another rancher chimed in about reflectors and mirrors that could signal across long distances. Someone else mentioned code-like patterns of flicking house lights on and off. Bit by bit, they cobbled together an unconventional plan for a robust communication net, designed to function even under the harshest electronic interference. The meeting ended with a mixture of fear and resolve. It was clear to everyone present that a showdown loomed on the horizon. The intruders were gearing up for a campaign of total dominance, one that might involve violence on a scale the town had never known. Yet no one was openly panicking. The ranchers had glimpsed their collective power, a tight-knit community that, under the right leadership and with the right plan, might just be able to fend off a small army. And at the helm of it all was Nina, whose quiet authority and expertise offered a beacon of hope in a desert that had grown dangerously dark. Days passed in a swirl of frantic preparation. The Donovan Ranch turned into a silent fortress, with motion sensors and hidden cameras tucked under eaves or behind fence posts. Tara helped reconfigure the feed store's supply chain so that essential items like fencing, diesel fuel, and spare parts were readily available. More than once, she intercepted suspicious calls inquiring about large hay orders, possible covers for something else. Each time, she meticulously documented the phone numbers and reported them to Sheriff Mendez. Meanwhile, Nina spent her free hours teaching those who were willing some of the tactics she had learned in the military. Simple things like how to patrol quietly at night without giving away your position, how to communicate silently with hand signals, and how to scan a landscape for signs of infiltration. For many, these lessons felt foreign, an intrusion on their peaceful country lives. Yet the repeated shootings of livestock and warnings pinned to doors made it clear that peace would only last if they stood ready to defend it. A pivotal moment came when an old rancher, Clyde Wilson, called Nina in a panic. Someone had slashed the tires on his pickup and left a threatening message spray-painted on his barn door. Next time, it's your house. Clyde was nearly 70 and lived alone on a scraggly plot of land. He'd never married, and his only son was off in another state. Nina gathered a few neighbors, and they arrived at Clyde's place by nightfall. They took shifts over the next week, setting up lookouts in Clyde's hay loft and rigging up battery-operated cameras. Nothing happened during that stakeout, but the old man's tearful thanks confirmed the community's new spirit of solidarity. Liam, for his part, supported Nina's leadership fully. He installed additional floodlights around the Donovan Ranch, but cleverly angled them so they lit up large swaths of land while leaving certain vantage points in darkness. Nina had explained how a spot of shadow could be more advantageous than broad daylight when used correctly. Each improvement, no matter how small, was part of an overall strategy to send a message to the intruders. We know you're here, and we're preparing for you. The local diner became an informal intel hub. Every time someone stopped in for coffee or breakfast, they swapped the latest gossip. Vehicles spotted, men in suits asking questions, farmland suddenly on the market. A waitress named Carla turned into an amateur detective, remembering who sat where, who paid in cash with crisp bills, and who lingered too long to eavesdrop on conversations. She fed that information to Nina, who cross-referenced it with her growing catalog of suspicious patterns. Bit by bit, the shape of a looming confrontation crystallized. Nina's nightmares grew more frequent as the date of this big push drew closer. She'd awaken, breathless, recalling firefights from her deployments that bled into images of the ranch. But each time she steadied herself with one thought: this land was worth protecting. She'd promised Liam she would never abandon him, and she intended to keep that promise, come what may. Then came the day everything tipped. Early one morning, Nina's cameras picked up not just a few figures, but multiple vehicles converging on a dirt road that skirted the Donovan Ranch. Black SUVs, tinted windows, each one taking up strategic positions as if rehearsing a blockade. Men in dark clothing hopped out, some with rifles slung across their chests. They moved swiftly, communicating with military-like hand signals. Tara, who was on watch from her own property, radioed in to report 3 similar SUVs near her land. Sheriff Mendez relayed that more had been spotted near the highway exit. The net was closing. Nina contacted Liam, telling him to alert every ranch on their communication network. This is it. They're making a large-scale move, possibly coordinated. Everyone needs to stay put, lock down, and get ready. A hush fell over the Donovan Ranch as hands scurried to secure tools, livestock, and themselves. Nina donned her tactical gear, the first time she'd brought it out in the open. It was a vest with reinforced panels, far from standard ranch attire. She clipped on a radio earpiece, strapped a handgun to her thigh, and kept a more powerful rifle within easy reach. When the first SUV approached the driveway, Nina could feel her heart pounding. A tall man stepped out wearing a crisp shirt and polished boots, exuding a chilling confidence. He introduced himself as Manuel Ferreira, claiming to represent a development company looking to partner on real estate deals. Liam stood beside Nina, arms crossed, as Ferreira gestured to the property. "This land is valuable," he said, voice carefully modulated. "I'd like to discuss an acquisition that benefits everyone. We can spare you any further harassment." Nina played it cool, feigning ignorance. "Harassment? We've had a few vandals, but nothing we can't handle. As for selling, it's not on the table." Ferreira let out a tight smile. "Are you sure? My associates have deep pockets. You'd be set for life. Think of the future." His tone held a veiled threat. Nina noticed that 2 men stood behind him with their hands resting casually on rifles. "We're sure," she replied. Ferreira's smile faded. "That's unfortunate, because the next time we come, it won't be a conversation." With that, he snapped his fingers, and the men retreated to the SUVs. They drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a silent ultimatum. Through her earpiece, Nina heard frantic chatter from other ranchers. The same scene was playing out in multiple locations, each with the same scripted intimidation. The message was clear: sell or suffer. Once Ferreira's convoy was gone, Nina allowed herself to breathe. She radioed the group. "They're testing our response. They want to see if we'll fold under direct pressure. Don't fold, but don't engage unless there's no choice." Across the ranch, a reluctant calm settled in. So it had begun, a conflict without illusions. The intruders had dropped their pretense of subtlety. Now it was a question of who blinked first in a desert that had seen more than its share of standoffs. In the aftermath of Ferreira's visit, everyone braced for the storm. Reports of sabotage came in like clockwork over the following days. Water tanks slashed, feed supplies contaminated, unexplainable fires starting in small sheds. Sheriff Mendez's phone blew up with complaints, yet arrests proved elusive. The perpetrators operated in the shadows, leaving no fingerprints or easily identifiable evidence. When a frantic call from Grant Howell indicated that armed men were trespassing on his ranch, Mendez rushed to the scene only to find empty fields by the time she arrived. It was a psychological siege, meant to wear down morale and portray the authorities as ineffectual. Yet, the intruders had underestimated Lunado Springs. With the new communication system in place, each attack or sighting was logged, mapped, and analyzed. Tara, using her experience as a veterinarian, began noticing patterns in how the intruders tracked the herds. "They're not just aimlessly wandering," she told Nina. They're strategically hitting points near water sources and feed stations, forcing the animals to cluster elsewhere. It's like they're funneling them into certain areas. Nina suspected the funneling was part of a bigger plan, perhaps to drive out the ranchers by making daily operations impossible or financially ruinous. Exasperated but determined, the community doubled down on its defenses. Liam improvised an early warning system around the ranch's perimeter, hidden tripwires connected to small alarms or lights. At night, the ranch glowed with scattered floodlights, and watchers took shifts scanning the horizon with binoculars or scope-equipped rifles. It was a far cry from the sleepy environment of a year ago. Lunado Springs now resembled a frontier outpost in hostile territory. One evening, as Nina peered through her spotting scope, she saw multiple SUVs stationed along a ridge far in the distance. Their lights were off, but the faint silhouettes betrayed their presence. She radioed Tara, who confirmed similar vehicles on the western side. A coordinated encirclement, perhaps. Ferreira and his men were still reluctant to mount a full-blown assault. Maybe they feared federal involvement, or maybe they were waiting for specialized reinforcements. Either way, each day of standoff gave the ranchers time to strengthen their unity and refine their tactics. Amid the escalating tension, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Donovan Ranch, a petite woman named Meredith Price, an investigative journalist from a regional paper. She had caught wind of the rumors and had come to see if there was a real story beneath the whispers. Nina was initially wary, remembering how press coverage could attract unwanted attention. But Meredith seemed earnest in her desire to expose criminal intimidation of rural landowners. After some debate, Nina decided to grant her a guarded interview. Meredith listened, rapt, as Nina and Liam recounted the sabotage, the threatening visits, and the uncertain alliance among ranchers. "This is bigger than your average land dispute," Meredith said, scribbling notes. "If what you're saying is accurate, it could be a cartel expansion right here in our backyard." She looked at Nina, curiosity burning in her eyes. "And you? Why do you seem so prepared?" Nina only shrugged. "I've had experiences that taught me to be ready." The journalist left without pressing further, but Nina could see the gears turning. If a story broke in the press, it might help, or it might escalate the conflict further. There was no going back now. The line had been drawn. Both sides waited for the other to make the next decisive move. The next few weeks felt like a protracted stalemate. The relentless tension weighed on everyone in Lunado Springs. Law enforcement presence had grown, if only marginally. Sheriff Mendez had managed to secure a bit of help from the State Department of Public Safety, 2 additional patrol cars on rotation. Yet these modest reinforcements couldn't cover the sprawling ranch lands round the clock. Instead, they served as a deterrent against casual threats, while the more sophisticated criminal operations simply adapted, choosing times and places where the deputies weren't. On the Donovan Ranch, Nina and Liam fine-tuned their preparations, which had evolved into a near-military operation. Motion sensors triggered silent alerts if someone crossed certain boundaries. A network of radio frequencies provided backup communication. Nina also set up 2 vantage points, one in an abandoned grain silo and another in a disused water tower on a far corner of the property. Both offered panoramic views of the terrain, and each contained modest supplies, bottled water, first aid kits, and spare ammunition, just in case someone got pinned down for hours. Meanwhile, more mysterious individuals appeared in town, frequenting the diner or the local motel. They arrived in gleaming SUVs or rental cars with out-of-state plates. Some wore expensive suits and used polite, rehearsed lines about investing in rural opportunities. Others dressed more casually but moved with the unmistakable efficiency of trained operators. Locals watched them warily, while these strangers paid with crisp bills and left big tips. Carla, the watchful waitress, made a habit of jotting down anything unusual, snippets of conversation, the timing of comings and goings, which seats the men chose to monitor the room. All of it eventually found its way to Nina, or, in a few cases, to Sheriff Mendez. One night near midnight, Nina was on patrol with a group of ranchers. They kept their headlights off, navigating by moonlight and memory along a back road that skirted Tara Chang's property. Their objective was simple: show a presence, make it clear that not every inch of land was unguarded. Nina's group spotted a shadowy figure near one of Tara's horse corrals. By the time they rushed in, the figure had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind cut wires on the enclosure gate. Tara arrived minutes later, fuming. "They keep going after my horses," she hissed. "They think it's my weakness. If they can't scare me when, maybe they'll cripple my business." Everyone felt the noose tightening. Every rustle of brush, every unexplained flashlight beam in the distance, every set of unfamiliar tire tracks sparked paranoia. Younger ranch hands sometimes muttered about heading it elsewhere, picking up jobs that didn't require a bulletproof vest. But many stayed. Some were ex-military or had grown up hunting in rugged conditions and relished a chance to stand their ground. Others stayed because Lunado Springs was home. Leaving felt like surrender. As the days crept by, Nina's conviction solidified. An open confrontation was inevitable. Ferreira's men grew more brazen, and it was only a matter of time before they tested the rancher's true resolve. She gathered as much intel as possible: photos, patterns of arrival, even the rumored presence of specialized gear. The question wasn't if they would strike, but when. The morning after one such tense patrol, a dozen ranchers gathered in the Donovan bunkhouse to debrief. Tara was there, along with Grant Howell, Clyde Wilson, and a handful of others who had committed to what they now privately called the stand. The mood was tense but purposeful. Nina pinned a map to the bunkhouse wall. It was marked with colored pushpins representing sightings, break-ins, and sabotage events. Red pins showed the more serious confrontations, yellow pins denoted possible scouting, and blue pins indicated property damage, like cut fences or stolen livestock. The clustering was unmistakable. There were several hot zones, areas that Ferreira's group had singled out repeatedly, presumably as key infiltration points for a larger operation. One such hot zone was near an old stream that ran behind Grant's ranch. Another was at a canyon crossing by the Garcia property. "We have enough evidence to know they're planning something coordinated," Nina told the group. "Multiple vehicles, synchronized timings. This is far beyond petty crime. They're establishing control in increments. Sheriff Mendez has some leads, but let's be honest. These people hide behind shell companies and plausible deniability. By the time official help arrives, we'll be neck-deep in trouble." Clyde tapped the map with a shaky finger. "My place is right on the edge of that canyon. If they break through me, they can funnel onto the main road. We've got a few cameras up, but it's not enough. I'm worried." The old man's stooped shoulders showed how exhausting the threat was for him. He barely slept, haunted by nightmares of armed men in his yard. Grant Howell, though younger, shared the anxiety. "They shot at my cattle again last night. Didn't kill any this time, but it's only a matter of time before they escalate. I've been thinking about selling. My wife wants us out. She says it's not worth the risk, but I don't want to hand them an easy victory." Nina inhaled, considering her words carefully. No one should feel guilty for leaving. Everyone has their own limits, but if we scatter, it only emboldens them. The entire region could fall under their control. We won't just lose ranches, we'll lose everything that makes this community ours. If we stand together, we force them to realize this isn't an easy conquest. She looked around the table. "We have an advantage they're not used to. We know this terrain, and we're united in defending it." Tara chimed in, detailing new ways to coordinate. She suggested distributing cheap handheld radios with frequency hopping features. "We can't assume they won't try advanced jamming. If we program a sequence of shifts, we might stay one step ahead. It's not bulletproof, but it's better than nothing." Liam proposed setting up additional vantage points along the canyon rim, manned in shifts by volunteers with enough training to spot movement. Though no one said it aloud, they were preparing for war. Not a declared war with uniforms and front lines, but a covert struggle of ambushes, sabotage, and psychological pressure. The men and women in that bunkhouse shared a collective shiver, a silent acknowledgement that they were stepping onto a dangerous path. Yet a spark of resolve glimmered in the room. For better or worse, they would not go quietly. Sheriff Mendez's visit that afternoon brought news of another kind. She entered the Donovan Ranch kitchen, looking worn down by weeks of minimal sleep. Rubbing her temples, she told Nina Mo and Liam, "I had a call from an old friend in the state task force. They have intel that suggests Ferreira's crew isn't just running a smuggling operation. They're installing a forward base. They might bring in heavier arms, specialized tech, and possibly more trained operators if they feel resistance stiffening. Nina's mind flashed back to her time overseas, seeing how insurgent groups set up forward bases in remote villages to dominate entire regions. Once entrenched, they could funnel resources, enforce their own rules, and stifle local opposition with brutal efficiency. She nodded grimly. We figured something like that was in the works. Do you have a timeline? Mendez shook her head. Nothing exact, but the chatter indicates they're ramping up soon. My friend hinted that if we can buy time, the higher-ups might authorize a bigger sting operation. But that's no guarantee. She paused, searching their faces. This is your last best chance to get out if you want. Once Ferreira's people set up a base, it's all downhill. Liam bristled. We're not leaving. This ranch is all we have. And nobody here wants to watch these criminals turn our land into a corridor for smuggling God knows what. We'll do what we have to do. Mendez nodded, half admiring, half worried. I'll help as best I can, but I can't sanction a vigilante group. If shooting starts, it could get very messy. The law's on your side in self-defense, but these folks are experts at twisting narratives. Be sure you document everything. Nina could see the genuine concern in the sheriff's eyes. The woman was caught between duty, empathy, and the harsh limitations of her role. After Mendez left, Liam sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The day had been a barrage of bad news, and the ranch finances weren't exactly stable to begin with. Nina placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll manage, she said softly. He looked up, gratitude and sorrow written across his face. You should have seen me go pale when Mendez mentioned heavier arms, he murmured. Makes me wonder if all the floodlights and cameras in the world can stop a determined group with automatic weapons. Nina understood the weight he carried. We can't outmuscle them, she conceded, but we can outthink them. We know this terrain. We can choose the time and place to stand our ground, if it comes to that. In truth, her mind was already racing with potential tactics, improvised obstacles, the strategic use of cover, diversionary maneuvers that might disorient even trained enemies. She had pulled off missions against insurmountable odds before. That experience, plus the fierce determination of the local community, gave her a glimmer of hope. The night sky was a deep, endless blue when Nina finally stepped outside. The desert air felt both freeing and suffocating. She cast her gaze over the ranch buildings, the cattle corrals, the ancient fence lines. This land was beautiful, harsh, and now endangered. In that moment, Nina resolved she would do anything, absolutely anything, to keep it from falling into the hands of Ferreira and his ilk. It was an hour before dawn when Nina jolted awake to the buzz of her handheld radio. Tara's voice crackled through, breathless and urgent. Nina, they're here. Multiple vehicles approaching from the west. Looks like they're setting up some kind of perimeter. Nina was on her feet in seconds, shaking Liam awake. Within minutes, they were checking vantage points and scanning camera feeds in the barn-turned command center. The images told a chilling story. Lines of headlights snaking through the dusty roads, men in dark clothing stepping out to position themselves at critical intersections. Nina grabbed the radio and barked instructions. Everyone hold positions until I give the signal. Don't engage if you're outgunned. We'll coordinate. She switched frequencies. Sheriff Mendez, do you trade? Only static. She tried a backup channel, but no response. Her stomach sank. Either Mendez was out of range or the cartel was jamming the signal already. On screen, she saw a pair of trucks peel off toward the eastern fence line, presumably to cut off any escape routes. The men moved decisively, like well-trained soldiers. Another group advanced up the main driveway, a convoy of 3 SUVs flanked by armed individuals on foot. Nina switched to the local ranch frequency. Heads up, they're coming in force. Everyone stick to the plan. If they breach your perimeter, fall back to designated fallback points. She prayed nobody would do anything reckless. Peering through a sniper scope from the barn's loft, Nina observed Ferreira himself stepping out of an SUV. He wore a faint smirk, as if confident the show of force alone would cow the ranchers. One of his men raised a loudspeaker. Nina Donovan, Liam Donovan, step out and surrender the property. You have no future here. Don't throw your lives away or foolish pride. The voice echoed across the silent ranch. Liam's hands shook as he gripped a rifle, but Nina gently pulled it from him. "No direct firefight yet," she whispered. "We hold." She keyed the radio again, hoping for any sign of Mendez. Nothing. A stone of anxiety lodged in her chest, but she maintained composure. She had always believed that controlling one's pulse and breath was half the battle. Calmness in chaos. Ferreira took another step forward, scanning the windows for movement. He ordered a group of men to fan out, checking sheds and smaller outbuildings. Nina knew they'd find mostly empty spaces or dummy setups designed to confuse them. The real defensive positions were hidden. She spotted at least 10 armed men, but more were likely circling the ranch. The same was probably happening at other properties, coordinated raids that pinned each ranch down. When one of Ferreira's men smashed open the door to the bunkhouse, Nina felt the shift in energy. So it begins, she thought. Months of tension and preparation converged in this single pre-dawn hour. Taking a steady breath, she raised her scope, scanning for any blatant attempt to harm her people. If Ferreira's men chose violence, she'd respond in kind, but only on her terms, from her vantage points, with the advantage of surprise. From her perch in the barn loft, Nina watched Ferreira's men scour the yard with practiced precision. Two of them split off toward the livestock pens, while another pair headed for the ranch house. She quietly reminded herself of the plan. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Let them think we're disorganized or afraid. Meanwhile, Liam crouched below, monitoring the live camera feeds. The radio crackled with Tara's voice. "They're hitting my place too. Same pattern, multiple vehicles, men spread out, looking for weaknesses. I'm holding them off at the stables, but they're threatening to torch the barn if I don't give up." Nina's jaw tightened. She could do nothing for Tara in that exact moment, and she knew the veterinarian had her own watchers stationed on nearby ridges. "Stay safe, Tara," Nina replied. "If it gets too hot, retreat to fallback position Bravo. We'll coordinate from there." Despite the tension, Nina noted that the intruder's communication seemed strained. She occasionally caught snippets of radio chatter that suggested something wasn't going smoothly on their end. Maybe it was the jamming software malfunctioning or some last-minute glitch. Ironically, the same advanced gear they hoped to use against the ranchers could become a liability if it failed. A tiny spark of hope flared in her mind. Perhaps they were not as invincible as they appeared. Suddenly, a crash came from below as Ferreira's men forced their way into the main barn. Liam tensed, motioning silently to Nina. She flicked off the safety on her rifle. Through a small slot in the loft, she could see the intruder stepping inside, flashlights slicing through darkness. The overhead light was out, thanks to a switch Liam had rigged, so the barn was shadowy. Nina held her breath. The men seemed cautious. Maybe they'd heard rumors of her sniper skills. Her heart thundered as she tracked one man's silhouette, his rifle barrel sweeping side to side. She felt the muscle memory of 1,000 training sessions, 1,000 hours hunched over a rifle in dusty foreign lands. But this was her home. She refused to shoot unless they posed a direct threat to her or Liam. The intruders advanced slowly, pausing to kick over tools and hay bales. Then one spotted the locked door leading to the small room with the camera feeds. He signaled the others, and together they moved to breach it. Nina whispered into her headset, "Liam, time to go." He acknowledged, flicking a hidden switch that cut power to the monitors and wiped the digital drives. They had prepared for this. No sense leaving behind evidence that could be exploited. Nina exhaled. Now or never. She had to lead them away from Liam. She tossed a small object, an old metal wrench, across the loft. It clanged loudly, drawing the men's attention. The intruders whirled, flashlights tracing the rafters. "Up there," one shouted. Gunfire shattered the barn's stillness, bullets splintering wood. Nina ducked behind a crossbeam. She had succeeded in diverting them from Liam, but now she was pinned with no quick escape route. Outside, the pre-dawn sky glowed faintly, promising daylight soon. But would it arrive in time? Pinned in the loft, Nina's pulse pounded in her ears. She couldn't stay hidden indefinitely, and a direct firefight inside the barn was a losing proposition. The intruders had superior numbers, and she didn't want to risk stray bullets hitting livestock or any ranch hands. Carefully, she shimmied across a narrow beam and peered down through a crack in the floor. Liam had slipped out through a rear entrance, as planned. Good. The men below remained fixated on the loft, flashlights raking across rafters. Somewhere outside, more gunfire erupted. Short bursts, then silence. Nina prayed it wasn't at Tara's place or any other ranch. She took a controlled breath, scanning for an exit strategy. An old ventilation window in the loft's roof offered a possible escape, but it was at least 7 feet up. If she tried to climb, she'd be fully exposed. Still, it might be her only option. She heard the men gather below, muttering about searching the upper level. With an agility honed over countless deployments, Nina sprang onto a support beam, then launched herself toward the ventilation window. A flashlight beam swept over her legs at the last second, sparking a shout. Gunfire roared. A bullet zipped past, grazing the window's frame. She clenched her teeth, kicked open the half-rotted slats, and squeezed through. Her body rolled onto the barn's gently sloped roof. Hard hammering, she crawled to a thicker wooden beam for partial cover. She heard curses from inside, and more gunshots that tore through the roof's thin metal. Rain gutter in hand, Nina slid down the side of the barn, hitting the ground with a jarring thud. She sprinted behind a stack of old pallets, breathing heavily. The desert air stung her lungs, but she was free of the barn. From here, she glimpsed the yard, a scattering of Ferreira's men, some aiming rifles at the barn loft, others scanning the perimeter. Off to the side, Liam was nowhere to be seen, which was good. If everything went according to plan, he'd circle around to the fallback area near the stables. Staying low, Nina crept toward a row of equipment sheds. She spotted a small group of ranch hands across the yard, crouched behind a tractor. They looked terrified, clutching hunting rifles but hesitating to engage. Nina gestured for them to hold their fire. The plan was still to avoid a pitched battle if possible. This needed to be a strategic defense, not a free-for-all. She keyed her handheld radio on a clandestine channel. "Nina, to anyone listening, I'm outside the barn, heading toward the stable. Watch for crossfire." A crackle, then a response. "Copy, Nina. We see multiple tangos near the bunkhouse. No sign of the sheriff." Nina grimaced. "Stay alert. They're trying to flush us out. Conserve ammo." Another burst of gunfire came from the far side of the ranch, likely a few ranchers exchanging shots with intruders trying to break into a tool shed. Sweat trickled down Nina's forehead. The confrontation they'd all dreaded was here, and it felt every bit as chaotic as her old battlefields overseas. She forced herself to remain calm. They had prepared for this, all that training, the recon, the alliances. This was the moment it would either pay off or crumble. Across town, similar scenes played out at multiple ranches. Tara's property became a battleground. Her watchers on the ridges had taken up well-concealed positions, firing warning shots whenever Ferreira's men tried to move closer. She refused to let them ignite her stables, using her knowledge of angles and lines of sight to outmaneuver them. The veterinarian's tranquil demeanor had given way to steely resolve. Some of her older horse pens had been retrofitted with sandbags, creating improvised bunkers that deflected small arms fire. Neighbors relayed updates on her success via handheld radios. "Tara's pinned, but holding them off. They can't close in without taking fire from the ridge." Meanwhile, at Clyde Wilson's ranch near the canyon, a group of younger volunteers, many of whom Clyde had known since they were children, managed to repel an attempted breach. One of Ferreira's scouts tried to slip down a back trail, only to find it rigged with a tripwire that set off a loud siren. Panicked, the intruder retreated and the entire flank faltered. Word of such small but meaningful victories spread quickly, bolstering morale. Grant Howell had less luck. He reported over the radio that several armed men had cut their way through his fencing and were threatening to torch his feed storage unless he yielded. Terrified, Grant barricaded himself in his farmhouse, tearfully updating the channel on every noise and movement he heard. Sheriff Mendez was nowhere to be found. Her own radio channel seemed jammed. A few ranchers promised to help him if they could, but everyone was fighting their own battles. Back at the Donovan Ranch, Nina reached the stable area, which had become a makeshift redoubt. Liam was there, along with 2 ranch hands, stationed behind a low wall of hay bales they'd hastily stacked. The men's faces showed relief as Nina approached. She counted at least 3 intruders prowling near the corral, scanning for movement. A plan formed in Nina's mind. She handed Liam her binoculars, then motioned for one ranch hand to circle around and create a distraction by rattling a gate. With adrenaline surging, the ranch hand complied, and the intruders swung around, momentarily exposing their backs. Nina sprang to her feet, leveling her rifle. A single shot cracked through the air, and one of the intruders dropped his gun with a pained shout. It was a disabling shot, aimed at the shoulder, not a kill. The other two dove for cover behind the corral fence, returning sporadic fire. Liam popped up, firing a warning shot into the dirt near their feet. "Retreat or stay down," Nina shouted. Her voice rang with an authority that left no doubt about her skill. The men hesitated, exchanging glances. Then one attempted to crawl away, dragging the wounded comrade. The last man slipped into the dark, presumably to regroup. Nina's hands shook, though her voice remained steady. She hated shooting people, hated the memories it dragged up. But it was them or us. She reminded herself that she had aimed to wound, not kill. Panting, she and Liam took cover again. The night still roiled with danger, but they had claimed one small victory. Signals came through the radio sporadically. Ranchers pinned down, others holding strong, pockets of fierce resistance that Ferreira's men found unexpectedly tough to break. The plan of unified defense was holding, for now. As dawn finally broke, the chaotic battles across Lunado Springs slowed to a tense lull. The glow of the rising sun revealed the toll of the night's confrontation. Bullet-riddled sheds, trashed barns, fences torn asunder. Smoke rose from minor fires that had been started, but mostly contained before they spread too far. A heavy hush hung in the air, broken only by the frantic lowing of cattle and the crackle of sporadic radio chatter. Ferreira's men hadn't managed a decisive sweep, but neither had the ranchers driven them off entirely. They occupied a disjointed patchwork of positions, some controlling key roads, others hidden among rocky outcroppings. A few intruders nursed wounds from the ranchers' defensive fire. Nina suspected Ferreira might have lost more men if the ranchers were less restrained. Despite the severity of the attack, she'd instructed everyone to prioritize non-lethal shots if possible, to wound or intimidate rather than kill. It was a risky ethical stance, but one she felt necessary. The more lethal the confrontation, the more likely Ferreira would respond with unbridled violence. Nina huddled with Liam, Tara, who had managed to slip away from her property to coordinate, and a few others at a half-collapsed tool shed near the edge of the Donovan Ranch. They shared water and energy bars, taking stock of who was injured. Tara's phone finally caught a signal, enabling a short text conversation with Carla at the diner. "Sheriff Mendez found. She's been pinned down near county line, calling for backup." Relief washed over them. At least the sheriff was alive, though unable to intervene at the moment. "Anybody managed to hold on to more than half their property?" Grant Howell's voice crackled through the radio. He was holed up in a barn, worried that Ferreira's men might return to finish the job. Nina keyed the mic. "We held the stables. Some intruders retreated, but the area isn't fully secure. Stay put and keep watch. Reinforcements might be coming." She hoped that wasn't a hollow promise. Liam checked the battered map they'd been using to track the invaders' positions. "It looks like they've segmented themselves. We have at least 3 clusters of these guys across different ranches, each cluster probably out of direct line of sight with the others. That might be our opening. They're not as coordinated as we feared, or maybe they lost contact with each other." Tara nodded, brushing sweat-soaked hair from her face. "We can't let them regroup. If they get reinforcements or re-establish central command, they'll mount a stronger offensive. We should move now while they're scattered." Nina glanced at her. "You sure? We might have the element of surprise, but we're also exhausted." A ranch hand named Carlos, a former Army medic, interjected. "We have to act or we'll be trapped in a siege. I can treat the wounded if things go south." The group fell silent, each grappling with the gravity of mounting a counter-initiative. There was a real possibility that engaging now could lead to more violence. Yet retreat guaranteed that Ferreira's men would consolidate. At length, Nina exhaled. "All right, we push. We do it with coordination. Tara, you circle west and cut off the men who occupied your corral. Liam and I will push east, clearing any stragglers from the orchard. We link up and then move on to the next ranch. Keep the radios on channel 3. Let's move before the sun's fully up." Steeled by exhaustion and determination, the ragtag group rose, weapons in hand, and prepared for the next phase of the fight. Nina led the eastern group in a crouched run across open ground. The orchard, though modest, provided some cover behind citrus trees, their leaves glistening in the early sunlight. From her vantage, she spotted two intruders crouched behind a half-destroyed fence, scanning the horizon with rifles at the ready. She signaled for her group to circle wide. Each step had to be silent. Dry twigs and gravel threatened to betray their approach. Suddenly, Liam knocked a metal pail with his foot, sending a clang echoing through the orchard. The intruders spun, rifles raised, eyes darting to pinpoint the source. Nina dropped flat behind a row of bushes, gesturing for Liam to do the same. One of the men fired a burst of automatic shots in their general direction, branches snapping overhead. Another parted the leaves, trying to spot movement. Keeping her breathing steady, Nina slid her rifle forward. Through the scope, she aligned the crosshairs on the intruder's shoulder. A single press of the trigger, the shot found its mark, and the man dropped, clutching his arm. His partner panicked and unleashed more gunfire, bullets whipping through the orchard. The ranchers hugged the ground, hearts pounding. Liam managed to crawl to a better angle, returning fire with carefully aimed shots that chipped away at the fence. "Go, go," Nina hissed, motioning for the ranch hands to move forward. They did, sprinting from cover to cover, forcing the lone, uninjured intruder to retreat further behind the fence. Nina advanced, reloading. She could hear the man's ragged breathing as she approached. When she rounded a thick citrus trunk, she found him aiming blindly in her direction. She kicked at his rifle barrel, disrupting his aim, and ordered him to drop it. He stumbled back, weighed by the reality that he was alone and outflanked. Breathing heavily, he dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Nina held her rifle steady. "Don't try anything. Get on your knees." The man complied. Liam rushed over, quickly frisking him for concealed weapons. The orchard fell silent except for the moans of the wounded man a few yards away. As Nina's group secured the area, she radioed, "Orchard clear. 2 intruders down. 1 wounded. 1 surrendered." Over the airwaves, Tara responded, "Copy. We cleared the corral. 3 of them fled. We've got 1 pinned under a wagon, might be stuck. We're okay, moving to link up." The orchard scenario had played out in mere minutes, but it felt like hours to Nina, whose veins coursed with adrenaline. She handed off the captured intruder to 2 ranch hands, instructing them to tie his wrists gently but securely and keep an eye on him. They proceeded further, stepping over broken branches and spent casings. Each step hammered home the gravity of the situation. This was a real battlefield now, with wounded and prisoners. Nina reined in her emotions. Letting anger or fear guide her would only lead to disaster. She felt a twinge of pity for the men who had gotten themselves into this. Ferreira's promise of easy dominance had run into a wall of determined ranchers. The group pressed on, their breaths ragged. The orchard had been reclaimed, but the ranch was still far from secure. They had to link up with Tara and then figure out how to evict the remaining intruders scattered around Lunado Springs. Each success in reclaiming a piece of land bolstered their morale, and the knowledge that neighbors were also fighting back with unwavering resolve gave Nina a flicker of hope in a world that had become terrifyingly uncertain. Tara and Nina's teams met at a midpoint between their respective battlegrounds, near a dried irrigation ditch that offered partial concealment. They exchanged quick updates. Tara's side had flushed out a handful of Ferreira's men, who retreated toward the highway. A few scattered holdouts remained, possibly regrouping. The day's sunlight was now in full force, reflecting off the dusty ground and amplifying the heat. Everyone was sweating and exhausted. They took a short respite, passing around water bottles. Tara's face was streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes still bright with purpose. "We can't let them slip away and rejoin Ferreira," she said. "If they escape, they'll return with reinforcements." Nina nodded grimly. "Agreed. But we also have wounded and captured men on our hands. We're not equipped to detain or treat them indefinitely." Carlos, the ex-medic, spoke up. "I can bandage the wounds, keep them from bleeding out at least. After that, we can decide if we hand them over to the sheriff or something else." The unspoken anxiety hung in the air. What if the sheriff remained pinned down or was forced to retreat? Handing them over would do little good if Ferreira's influence stretched beyond the local jail. The conversation was cut short by the sound of engines. Everyone ducked. An SUV roared toward the orchard, raising clouds of dust, then skidded to a halt as the driver spotted the ranchers. Nina raised her rifle, bracing for a firefight, But to her relief, the vehicle's occupants were not Ferreira's men. She recognized one as Jiro Kimura, a local who ran the feed store. He stepped out, waving frantically. "They're pulling back near the old highway. Several SUVs just drove past the diner," he shouted. Carla said some of them looked wounded. They must be retreating, but no sign of Ferreira yet. This was both good and bad news. It implied that the ranchers had inflicted enough harm for some intruders to withdraw. But if Ferreira hadn't retreated, he might be rallying whoever remained for a second wave. Nina shared a look with Tara and Liam. "Let's keep pressing. We isolate and neutralize any small pockets of resistance, push them all the way back to the highway. Maybe we can corner Ferreira." They discussed logistics. Jiro would help transport the wounded, rancher and intruder alike, to a safer area for medical attention. Tara would take half the team south, skirting the orchard to block any attempt at a flanking maneuver. Nina and Liam would proceed north, clearing any lingering threats. Before splitting up, they took a moment to reflect on how surreal it all felt. Just months ago, Lunado Springs was a sleepy ranch community where the biggest drama might be a rodeo or a property line dispute. Now it was a war zone with civilian volunteers coordinating advanced tactics to fend off a cartel incursion. Nina steeled herself. "Remember," she told the group, "we're not out for vengeance. We're defending our land and our lives. Treat prisoners humanely, and if they throw down their weapons, let them live." After a round of nods, the teams parted ways, engines revving as they drove off in separate directions. In the shimmering heat of midday, Lunado Springs stood on a razor's edge. Either the intruders would be fully pushed out, or they would regroup for a more devastating assault. Nina clenched the steering wheel, eyes scanning every turn in the road. She silently prayed that the sheriff's promised backup might actually materialize. Yet deep down, she knew this would likely be resolved by the people who lived here, for better or worse. Nina's team advanced slowly up a gravel road, lined with mesquite trees. Every so often, they'd catch sight of movement in the bushes, perhaps an intruder trying to circle back. Each time, they stopped to investigate, mindful of potential ambushes. The day dragged on, the sun pounding overhead, nerves fraying with each hour. Occasionally, distant gunshots echoed across the plains, evidence that sporadic skirmishes continued on other ranches. Suddenly, her radio sparked to life, a familiar voice. "Sheriff Mendez calling. Do you copy?" Nina almost cried with relief. "Reading you loud and clear, Sheriff. Where are you?" Static hissed before Mendez's reply. "I've got state troopers with me. We managed to break free from that roadblock. We're heading toward the Donovan Ranch. Status?" Nina gave a rapid summary. Several intruders had retreated. Others might be regrouping. Some were injured and in custody. "Good work," Mendez said. "I can arrange medical transport and detention. We also have a few federal agents en route. This could turn into a larger bust if we handle it right. Keep them pinned down if you can." Nina nodded to herself, fresh hopes surging. "Roger that. We'll hold positions." She relayed the update to Liam and the others. A few miles farther up the road, they encountered a large SUV stopped crookedly on the shoulder. Two of Ferreira's men lay in the dirt, apparently wounded. They raised shaky hands in surrender when they saw the ranchers approach with rifles ready. Carlos hurried out to check their injuries, and Nina questioned them. One man trembled, stammering, "Ferreira, he's gone south, I think. Said we were on our own if we couldn't handle farmers with guns. He left us." Nina exchanged a glance with Liam. So Ferreira had cut and run. It made sense. Once he realized the operation was failing and law enforcement might close in, a man like Ferreira would abandon his team. She spat in the dust. "Coward," she muttered. But the real cowardice would be letting him escape. She radioed Tara. "Ferreira might be fleeing south. Keep an eye out." Minutes after securing the wounded men, they heard the distinct rumble of engines. A convoy of 4 vehicles appeared. 2 county patrol, in 2 black SUVs with tinted windows. For an anxious second, Nina raised her weapon, thinking it might be more of Ferreira's men. But then she recognized the small insignia on the SUVs. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Relief coursed through her. Sheriff Mendez stepped out of one patrol car, flanked by men in suits. Her smile was tight, eyes scanning the chaotic scene. Bandaged intruders, bullet-riddled trucks, weary ranchers with guns at the ready. "We'll take it from here," she announced, gesturing for the feds to secure the area. A wave of exhausted gratitude swept over the ranchers. But Nina's mind stayed on Ferreira. Where was he? Had he truly abandoned his entire crew to face the music alone? She lingered near the trunk of a mesquite tree, scanning the horizon. A single black dot in the sky, maybe a helicopter or drone, hovered in the far distance, but it offered no clues. Despite the partial victory, the job wasn't finished until Ferreira was caught. Still, for now, the presence of law enforcement and federal agents meant the ranchers could finally lower their weapons, if only slightly. In the days that followed, Lunado Springs underwent a remarkable transformation. Federal agents swept the area, collecting evidence, interviewing ranchers, and cataloging the aftermath of Ferreira's assault. A handful of cartel foot soldiers were taken into custody, along with incriminating documents found in abandoned SUVs. Some wounded intruders quietly slipped away, melting into distant highways and border towns. While Ferreira himself remained at large, his operation had been dismantled so thoroughly that it would take a Herculean effort to reestablish a foothold. The ranchers, meanwhile, were left to pick up the pieces. Dozens of fences needed repair, livestock had scattered, and bullet holes pockmarked barns and storage sheds. Yet a spirit of camaraderie blossomed that few had ever witnessed. Ranch hands and owners alike pitched in on each other's properties. The feed store offered discounted materials. Tara opened her veterinary clinic to treat not just wounded animals, but also those few ranchers who'd sustained minor injuries. A local construction firm volunteered to help rebuild the more heavily damaged structures at minimal cost. Sheriff Mendez, vindicated by the eventual arrival of backup, became a local hero. Her dedication in the face of impossible odds earned her profound respect. In a gesture of appreciation, the community organized a small ceremony at the diner, presenting her with a plaque. It was a humble token, but Mendez's eyes misted with gratitude. "I only wish we could have gotten here sooner," she said. "Your unity did more than any official agency could. You protected yourselves and each other." For Nina, the events felt both surreal and eerily familiar. The Donovan Ranch's battered outbuildings reminded her of old conflict zones, places where bullet-scarred walls bore silent testimony to battles won and lost. But here in her homeland, the victory carried a different weight. This was not just about pushing back an enemy, it was about preserving a way of life. News outlets picked up the story in bits and pieces. Some framed it as a dramatic showdown between armed ranchers and a cartel cell. Others highlighted the community's cooperation, marveling that everyday farmers had outsmarted and outlasted trained criminals. A few journalists even hinted at Nina's past as a sniper, though no one had the full details. When asked, she dismissed questions by saying she was just a rancher helping her neighbors. Months later, an uneasy calm settled over the region. Ferreira's name still popped up in hushed conversations, and rumors swirled that he'd fled the country or holed up somewhere waiting for a chance to return. But as time stretched on, no new threats materialized. Infrastructure repairs progressed. Ranches returned to their daily grind of feeding cattle, mending fences, and bargaining over feed prices. The extraordinary measures, tripwires, silent alarms, patrols, remained in place, but in a more discreet fashion. Each rancher understood that complacency could invite future danger. In an unlikely twist, a small federal delegation visited Lunado Springs to study what had happened. They interviewed Nina, Liam, Tara, and several others, hoping to glean insights on how local resilience could thwart well-funded criminal enterprises. Nina offered polite answers, focusing on the basics: communication, cooperation, and a willingness to defend what you love. Deep down, she knew the truth was more nuanced. Hard-earned lessons from overseas, combined with the grit of people who refused to surrender. In the end, the region had withstood a cartel storm not through brute force alone, but through unity and determination. And that, to Nina, was the most powerful victory of all. Looking back on all that happened in Lunado Springs, I'm still in awe of how everyday people, ranchers, neighbors, even the local vet, banded together in the face of real danger. Despite the threats, sabotage, and bullets that tore through their quiet lives, they refused to abandon the land that defined them. For me, the most inspiring takeaway is that true strength lies in unity and determination. Tools, tactics, and training matter, But it's the commitment to protecting each other that makes a victory like this possible. What did you think of the story's twists and turns? Do you have your own ideas on how communities can stand strong against overwhelming odds? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of the exciting stories we have in store.